power, prejudice, and a single unmarked Lincoln Town car gliding through the manicured streets of a wealthy suburb. In the driver's seat, a woman whose mind has shaped the laws of the nation. In the rearview mirror, flashing lights driven by a man who believes his badge makes him the law. He saw an easy target, a routine stop to assert his dominance. What he didn't know is that he wasn't just pulling over an elderly black woman. He was pulling over the very scales of justice, and the weight of his actions was about to crush him completely. This isn't just a story of a traffic stop gone wrong. It's the story of what happens when a lifetime of quiet dignity collides with a moment of arrogant hatred. Officer Dale Miller hated late afternoon shifts in Oak Creek. The sun, a fat, lazy orange, would hang low in the sky, glinting off the immaculate windshields of luxury SUVs and the ridiculously oversized windows of new money mansions. It was a golden, peaceful light that felt like a mockery to the curdled resentment simmering in his gut. For 15 years, he'd been on the force. 15 years of watching younger, smoother-talking guys climb the ladder while he was stuck on patrol, a glorified security guard for the town's richest 1%. He squeezed the worn leather of the steering wheel, his knuckles white. Beside him, his partner for the last 6 months, Officer Robert Peterson, was quietly filling out paperwork on the mounted laptop. Peterson was young, barely 25, with a face that hadn't yet learned to hide its earnestness. He still believed in community policing. Miller believed in authority. "Look at this," Miller grunted, nodding towards a sprawling colonial with a lawn so perfect it looked like green concrete. "Bet they pay more for their petunias than I make in a month." Peterson didn't look up. "It's a nice town, Dale." "It's a fishbowl," Miller corrected, "and we're just here to scoop out the occasional piece of dirt that floats in." That's when he saw it. A Lincoln Town car, at least 20 years old but pristine. It was a deep presidential blue, the kind of car your grandfather drove. It moved with a slow, deliberate grace, signaling properly as it turned onto the sycamore-lined avenue. But it was the driver that snagged Miller's attention like a fishhook. An elderly black woman, her hair a tight crown of silver-white curls, her hands steady on the wheel at the 10-2 position. Something primal and ugly stirred in Miller's chest. A car like that, driven by a woman like that, in this part of Oak Creek at this time of day? To him, the equation was simple. She was the help, a maid, a cook, heading home after a long day of scrubbing floors for the people he resented. And the car, while old, was too clean, too well kept. It felt out of place. It was a piece of dirt floating in his fishbowl. "We're going to take that one," Miller said, his voice flat. Peterson finally looked up, his brow furrowing. He saw the Lincoln. "On what grounds, Dale?" "She's doing 24 and a 25. Signal was perfect." "Her license plate frame," Miller said, the lie forming instantly smoothly, "partially obscures the state motto. That's a violation. Section 4, subsection B of the Vehicle Code." Peterson squinted. From 50 yards away, there was no way Miller could have read the frame, let alone determined if it was an infraction. He knew what this was. It was one of Dale's fishing expeditions. He'd seen it before, but always with teenagers in souped-up Hondas, not with someone's grandmother. "Dale, come on," Peterson started, but Miller had already flicked on the lights. The brilliant strobes of red and blue fire erupted in the tranquil afternoon, splashing silently across the manicured lawns and stone facades. The deep blue Lincoln immediately and correctly signaled and pulled over to the curb, its movements unhurried and precise. "See?" Miller smirked, a cruel little twist of his lips. "Cooperative. They always are at first." He unbuckled his seatbelt, the click echoing in the tense silence of the patrol car. Peterson felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This felt wrong. He'd joined the force to help people, to uphold the law, not to be a bully on a power trip. But Miller was his senior officer, his training officer. Dissent had consequences. So he stayed quiet, his hand hovering over the radio, and watched as Dale Miller, filled with a vague and venomous rage, stepped out of his car and into the golden, mocking light. Justice Rosalind Beaumont watched the officer approach in her rearview mirror. She felt no fear, only a profound and weary sense of disappointment. For 72 years, She had navigated the world in this skin, and the sudden appearance of flashing lights in her mirror was a language she understood with painful fluency. She had been a law professor, a federal judge, and for the last 18 years, an associate justice of the Supreme Court of the United States. She had dissected the most complex legal arguments of the nation, but she knew that in this moment, on this quiet suburban street, her identity was reduced to two simple, inescapable facts. She was black and she was old. She placed the car in park, killed the engine, and rolled her window down halfway, letting in the scent of cut grass and the faint, anxious chirping of a house finch. She placed her hands, palms up, on the steering wheel, a gesture she had taught her sons and grandsons to perform without hesitation. It was a posture of de-escalation, of transparency. Officer Miller's reflection grew larger in the side mirror. He didn't walk. He swaggered, his hand resting on the butt of his holstered firearm. He didn't approach her window directly but stopped just behind it, forcing her to crane her neck to see him. It was a classic intimidation tactic, designed to establish dominance from the first second. "Ma'am," he began, his voice a low drawl that was meant to sound relaxed but was laced with condescension. "You know why I pulled you over today?" Justice Beaumont turned her head slowly, her gaze meeting his. Her eyes were dark, sharp, and missed nothing. She saw the slight tremor of aggression in his jaw, the proprietary way he surveyed the interior of her car. "No, officer, I do not," she replied. Her voice was calm, clear, and carried a natural resonance of authority that seemed to momentarily surprise him. "I was driving under the speed limit, I signaled my turn, and I came to a full stop at the intersection." Miller's smirk tightened. "Your license plate frame, ma'am. It's covering the state motto, the Garden State. That's a violation." Rosalind glanced at her dashboard, where the car's registration and her own perfectly valid insurance card were already clipped together, ready to be presented. She had bought that frame at a fundraiser for the Police Benevolent Association 5 years ago. The irony was not lost on her. "I see," she said, her tone even. "License, registration, and proof of insurance?" "Let's start with your license," Miller said, leaning down. He peered into her car, his eyes scanning the passenger seat, the back seat. He wasn't looking for anything in particular. He was performing a search with his eyes, making her feel exposed, invaded. She retrieved her wallet from her handbag on the passenger seat, her movements slow and deliberate. She extracted her driver's license and handed it to him. He took it without looking at her, his eyes on the plastic card. "Rosalind Beaumont," he read aloud, mispronouncing it as Rosaline. "Where you headed in such a hurry, Rosalind?" He used her first name with a familiarity that was both unprofessional and deeply disrespectful. "I am not in a hurry, officer," she corrected him gently, "and my name is pronounced Rosalind. I was on my way to visit a dear friend who lives a few blocks from here. We attended law school together." Miller's eyes flickered with something, annoyance perhaps at being corrected. "Law school, huh? Well, the law says you can't obscure your plate, registration, and insurance." She passed the documents to him. He took his time examining them, holding them up to the light as if they might be forgeries. In the patrol car, Peterson watched the exchange, the knot in his stomach growing tighter. The stop was already over 30 seconds long, and Miller hadn't even run the plates yet. He was just toying with her. "Everything seems to be in order here," Miller finally said, handing the papers back. But he didn't move. He continued to lean against her car. "This is a nice car for its age. Yours?" The question hung in the air, thick with insinuation. "How could you afford this? Did you steal it?" Justice Beaumont's composure remained absolute, a dam of granite against his tide of prejudice. "Yes, it is mine. I purchased it new in 2005. It's been very reliable." "Uh-huh," Miller grunted. He shined his flashlight into her back seat, the beam cutting through the dimming afternoon light. It illuminated a worn leather briefcase. "What's in the bag?" "My work," she replied simply. "Yeah? What kind of work is that?" The question was a clear overstep. The traffic stop, even on its flimsy pretext, was concluded. He had no reason to detain her further, no probable cause to question her about the contents of her car. This was no longer about a license plate frame. This was about power. Justice Rosalind Beaumont looked at him, her gaze unflinching. She could end this. She could simply state who she was. But she wanted to see how far he would push. She wanted to give him every opportunity to walk back from the precipice. "Officer," she said, her voice dropping slightly, losing its gentle tone and gaining a new, harder edge of steel. "Have you issued me a citation?" Miller was taken aback. "Not yet. Am I being detained or am I free to go?" The classic legal challenge. It was a question that demanded a specific answer. He could no longer operate in the gray area of a casual stop. He had to either let her go or articulate a reason for her continued detention. And in his arrogance, Dale Miller made his choice. "You're being detained," he snapped, his condescending mask slipping to reveal the raw anger beneath. "Now I asked you a question. What's in the bag?" The air thickened. The chirping of the finch seemed to cease, and the hum of a distant lawnmower faded into an unnerving silence. Officer Peterson, watching from the patrol car, sat bolt upright. Miller had just crossed a bright, unambiguous line. He had detained a citizen without reasonable suspicion. Peterson's training screamed at him that this was wrong, a textbook Fourth Amendment violation. Justice Beaumont's hands, which had remained on the steering wheel, slowly folded into her lap. She had given him the off-ramp, and he had sped right past it, flooring the accelerator. "Officer," she said, her voice now devoid of any warmth, a precise and powerful instrument, "you have no probable cause to inquire about the contents of my personal belongings. The traffic stop for which you pulled me over is concluded. Your continued detention of my person is unlawful." Each word was perfectly enunciated, a legal brick laid carefully into a wall of defiance. For a moment, Miller was stunned silent. He wasn't used to this. He was used to stammering, to fear, to indignant but ultimately powerless protests. He was not used to a lecture on constitutional law from an old woman in a Lincoln. His surprise quickly curdled into fury. "Oh, we got ourselves a little lawyer, do we?" he sneered, his face contorting into an ugly mask of contempt. "You watch a lot of TV, is that it? Let me explain how the real world works. I am a police officer. I ask the questions. You see this badge? It means I am in charge here. Now for the last time, what is in the briefcase?" "I am not required to answer that question," she stated flatly. This was it, the final rejection of his authority. In Miller's warped view, this wasn't about the law, it was about respect. And this woman was not giving him the deference he believed he was owed. "That's it," he snarled. "I've had enough of your lip. Step out of the vehicle, ma'am." "On what grounds?" Justice Beaumont asked, her eyes narrowing. "You do not have my consent to search my vehicle, and you have not articulated any suspicion of a crime that would warrant me exiting my car. Step out of the car, or I will remove you from it," Miller barked, his hand moving from his gun to his taser. "I'm asking you one last time." In the patrol car, Peterson's heart was hammering against his ribs. This was escalating into a disaster. He grabbed the radio mic. "Dale," he said into the car's internal comms, "let's just write the ticket for the frame and go. This isn't worth it." Miller ignored him. His entire focus was on the woman in the car, this immovable object that was defying his will. Her calmness was salt in his wound. "Officer," Justice Beaumont said, her voice a low, dangerous warning, "you are making a grave professional mistake. I suggest you reconsider your course of action. The only mistake here was you thinking you could give me orders," Miller shot back. He reached for her door handle. It was in that moment that Rosalind knew she had no other choice. The legal and civil experiment was over. He had failed every test. She could have allowed this to escalate further, let him drag her from the car, perhaps even cuff her, and the resulting lawsuit would have been monumental. But she was not a professional victim. She was a guardian of the law he was so eagerly trampling. It was her duty not just to interpret the law, but sometimes to embody it. She held up a single steady hand. "Stop." The command was so absolute, so filled with an ancient and unshakable authority, that Miller actually paused, his hand hovering over the chrome handle. "Before you take one more step," she said, her eyes locking onto his, "you need to understand the full scope of the situation. You need to understand who I am." Miller let out a short, derisive laugh. "I don't care if you're the Queen of England. Out of the car, now." "I assure you, My position carries significantly more weight in this particular jurisdiction than hers does, Justice Beaumont said. She reached slowly, deliberately into her handbag again. Miller tensed, his hand tightening on his taser. She did not pull out a weapon. She pulled out a small black leather billfold. She opened it and held it up for him to see. Inside, behind a clear plastic window, was not a driver's license, but a different kind of identification. It was stark white, with an official seal and a photograph. Miller squinted, his anger making it difficult to focus. He leaned closer, his face inches from the window. He read the black, embossed letters beneath her photograph. Rosalind A. Beaumont, Associate Justice, Supreme Court of the United States. The words did not compute at first. They were just letters, arranged in an impossible sequence. Associate Justice, Supreme Court of the United States. It was like reading a sentence in a language he didn't speak. He blinked, shaking his head slightly, certain he was misreading it. He looked from the ID card to her face. He saw her, really saw her, for the first time. The quiet, unassailable confidence, the piercing intelligence in her eyes, the precise, almost academic way she spoke. It wasn't the defiance of a criminal. It was the composure of someone who was so far beyond his authority that his threats were like a child's tantrum. Then the second wave hit him. Comprehension. And it was not a wave, but a tsunami. It crashed through his arrogance, shattered his prejudice, and scoured away his sense of power, leaving nothing but cold, raw, bottomless dread. His breath hitched in his throat. The blood drained from his face, leaving a sickly pale pallor under his tan. His mouth went dry. The entire world seemed to tilt on its axis. He had not just pulled over a black woman, he had illegally detained, threatened, and attempted to illegally search a sitting justice of the United States Supreme Court. He snatched his hand back from the door handle as if it were red-hot iron. He stumbled back a step, his swagger gone, replaced by a clumsy, panicked retreat. That's not real, he stammered, but his voice was a weak, cracking whisper. The accusation had no conviction. It was the last gasp of a drowning man. I can assure you, Officer Miller, it is very real, Justice Beaumont said, her voice as level and unforgiving as a slab of marble. She put the identification away. My credentials, my appointment by President Anderson in 2007, and my subsequent confirmation by the Senate are all matters of public record. You can verify it easily. From the patrol car, Peterson had watched the entire exchange. He saw Miller's sudden, horrified recoil. He saw the color drain from his partner's face. He couldn't see the ID, but he knew with absolute certainty that this traffic stop had just detonated. Miller stood frozen on the pavement, his mind a whirlwind of panicked thoughts. Every procedural shortcut he'd ever taken, every snide comment, every biased stop. His entire 15-year career was flashing before his eyes, culminating in this single catastrophic act of hubris. He had built a house of cards on a foundation of prejudice, and he had just tried to bully the one person who could bring the entire structure crashing down with a single phone call. I apologize, ma'am. Your Honor, he sputtered, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. There's been a misunderstanding. There has been no misunderstanding, Justice Beaumont countered, her voice sharp and precise, cutting through his fumbling excuses. You understood perfectly. You saw an elderly black woman driving in a neighborhood you felt she didn't belong in. You manufactured a pretext to stop me. You ignored my compliance and sought to escalate the situation. You unlawfully detained me after the purpose of the stop was complete. You attempted to coerce me into an illegal search of my property, and you threatened to physically remove me from my vehicle when I asserted my constitutional rights. The only misunderstanding, Officer Miller, is your own. You have fundamentally misunderstood the nature of your duty and the limits of your authority under the law. Each sentence was a hammer blow, dismantling his pathetic attempt at an apology. He was no longer dealing with a traffic stop victim. He was being cross-examined by one of the finest legal minds in the country, and he had no defense. Now, Justice Beaumont continued, I would like your name and badge number, and the name and badge number of your partner in the vehicle. Miller felt a fresh wave of nausea. He had dragged Peterson into this. He numbly recited his own name and number, then Peterson's. "Thank you," she said. "You may return to your vehicle. I will wait here. I am calling your station to request that your commanding officer meet me at this location immediately." She picked up her cell phone. Miller, utterly defeated, could only nod. He turned and walked back to the patrol car, his legs feeling like lead. He didn't look at Peterson as he slumped into the driver's seat. He just stared through the windshield, his world reduced to the flashing red and blue lights that now seemed to be illuminating his own personal hell. Peterson finally found his voice. It was barely a whisper. "Dale, what did you do?" Dale Miller didn't answer. He couldn't. He just sat there, listening to the static on the radio, which sounded like the inside of his own imploding mind. On the side of the road, a 72-year-old woman was calmly making a phone call that would not just end his career, but would change the course of his entire life. The 10 minutes it took for Oak Creek Police Chief Frank Reynolds to arrive felt like 10 years to Dale Miller. He sat in stunned silence, unable to process the magnitude of his error. Peterson, for his part, had his head in his hands, running the encounter over and over in his mind, his own culpability gnawing at him. He hadn't been the aggressor, but he had been silent. His silence had been complicity. Chief Reynolds' black SUV came tearing around the corner, lights on but siren off, and screeched to a halt behind their patrol car. Reynolds was a large man, a former detective who had worked his way up the ranks. He was a political animal, adept at managing the town council and keeping the press happy. He exited the vehicle with a speed that belied his size, his face a grim mask of controlled panic. He had received a call from dispatch, patched through from Justice Rosalind Beaumont herself, and the words "unlawful detention" in Supreme Court had sent a jolt of pure terror through him. He bypassed the patrol car entirely, walking directly to the driver's side of the Lincoln. He saw Justice Beaumont sitting calmly, her window still down. "Your Honor," Reynolds began, his voice strained but respectful. He had already pulled up her official photo on his phone. There was no doubt. "I am Chief Frank Reynolds. I came as soon as I heard. I want to apologize profusely on behalf of my department for the actions of my officer." "Your apology is noted, Chief Reynolds," Justice Beaumont replied, her tone cool and professional. "However, an apology does not rectify a constitutional violation. Your officer, Dale Miller, badge number 714, engaged in a pattern of behavior that suggests either a profound ignorance of established law or a willful disregard for it. Either possibility is deeply concerning for a sworn officer of the peace." Reynolds swallowed hard. "I understand completely, Your Honor. I can assure you, we will be opening an immediate and thorough internal affairs investigation." "You will," she agreed. "You will also be securing Officer Miller's body camera footage, as well as the dash cam footage from his vehicle. I trust it will corroborate my account of the events that just transpired." Miller's blood ran cold. The camera. He'd been so caught up in his own power trip, he'd completely forgotten it was recording everything. His fabricated reason for the stop, his condescending tone, his illegal demands, his threats. It was all there, in high-definition video and audio. His career wasn't just over, it was a smoldering crater. "Of course, Your Honor, immediately," Reynolds said. "Is there anything at all I can do for you right now? Can I provide you with an escort to your friend's home?" "That will not be necessary, Chief," she said, finally turning the key in the ignition. The old Lincoln purred to life. "I am perfectly capable of driving the remaining 2 blocks. What I require from you is not an escort, but an assurance. An assurance that you will handle this matter with the gravity it deserves." This was not about a rude officer and a scared citizen. This was about a fundamental abuse of state power. It is fortunate that I was the target today, as I am uniquely equipped to address it. But I can't help but wonder, Chief, how many people has Officer Miller treated this way who didn't have Supreme Court justice on their identification card? How many of them were bullied, illegally searched, and had their rights trampled because they didn't know the law or were too afraid to assert it? The question was a rhetorical dagger, and it struck Reynolds right in the chest. He had no answer. "You have a serious problem in your department, Chief Reynolds," Justice Beaumont concluded, "and I expect you to solve it. You will be hearing from my office. Good day." With that, she put the car in drive, signaled, and pulled away from the curb as smoothly and lawfully as she had done everything else. She drove down the street and turned the corner, disappearing from view, leaving behind a scene of absolute professional carnage. Chief Reynolds stood on the curb for a long moment, watching her go. Then he turned, his face a thundercloud of fury, and marched towards the patrol car. He ripped open the passenger door, his eyes locking on Miller. "You and Peterson, my office." "Now," he commanded, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "Hand me your body cameras, both of you. And don't you dare say a single word until you are sitting in front of me with an IA detective and a union rep." Miller fumbled to unclip his camera, his hands shaking so badly he could barely manage the latch. Peterson did the same, his face pale and grim. They handed the small black boxes to Reynolds as if they were live grenades. As they drove back to the station in a silence thicker than cement, Dale Miller knew his life as a police officer was over. What he didn't yet realize was that his punishment was only just beginning. The wheels of justice, real, formidable, and personified by the woman in the blue Lincoln, were just starting to turn. The internal affairs interrogation room at the Oak Creek Police Department was a small, windowless box painted a miserable shade of beige. It was designed to make people feel insignificant and isolated, and for Dale Miller, it was succeeding spectacularly. He sat at the small metal table, a union representative he barely knew sitting impassively beside him. Across from him were Lieutenant Maria Sanchez, the head of IA, and Chief Reynolds himself, who had insisted on being present. A small speaker on the table was playing audio. His audio. "We got ourselves a little lawyer, do we? You watch a lot of TV, is that it? Let me explain how the real world works." Miller flinched as his own sneering voice filled the room. Sanchez paused the playback. "So, Officer Miller," she began, her tone dangerously neutral. "In your initial statement, you claimed you felt the driver was acting suspiciously and that you asked her to exit the vehicle because you feared for your safety. Can you point to anything in what we've just heard that substantiates that fear?" Miller licked his dry lips. Her tone, it was argumentative, non-compliant. That's a red flag. "She was asserting her Fourth Amendment rights, Dale," Chief Reynolds cut in, his voice dripping with contempt. "The fact that you interpret that as a red flag is the entire problem." The union rep shifted, clearing his throat. "My client was in a potentially stressful situation and made a judgment call." "A judgment call?" Sanchez interrupted, sliding a folder across the table. "Let's talk about judgment. We pulled your activity logs for the past 2 years. You have a statistically significant pattern of initiating traffic stops for minor, often subjective infractions. Things like partially obscured plate, improper lane change, suspiciously slow driving. And over 70% of those stops involve minority drivers in a town that is 94% white. How do you explain that disparity, Officer Miller?" "I patrol the whole town. I stop who I see breaking the law," Miller mumbled, his eyes fixed on the table. He was trying to stick to the script he and the rep had rehearsed, but it was falling apart under the weight of the evidence. "Let's move on to Officer Peterson's testimony," Sanchez said, opening another folder. The scene shifted. An hour earlier, Robert Peterson had sat in the same chair. He had waived his right to have a rep present. He looked pale, but his voice was steady. "I knew the initial pretext for the stop was weak," Peterson told them, his eyes meeting Sanchez's directly. "I couldn't see the plate frame. Dale, Officer Miller, he just gets a feeling about people sometimes. He calls it good police instinct. But it's not. It's a bias." Peterson recounted the entire incident, his version aligning perfectly with the body cam footage and Justice Beaumont's account. He talked about Miller's escalating aggression, his disrespectful tone, and the moment he illegally detained the justice. "Did you try to intervene?" Sanchez asked. Peterson's face fell. This was the moment of his own shame. Verbally, over the in-car comms. "I told him to just write the ticket and let her go. He ignored me. I should have done more. I should have gotten out of the car, called him off. But he's my senior officer. I froze. "Your testimony has been noted, Officer Peterson," Sanchez had said. "Your candor is appreciated." Now, back in the room with Miller, Sanchez slid Peterson's signed statement across the table. Miller refused to look at it. He felt a flash of betrayal towards his partner, quickly followed by the sickening realization that Peterson had simply told the truth. There was no conspiracy against him. He had built his own gallows. "So, Officer Miller," Sanchez said, leaning forward, "we have the victim's testimony, a victim who happens to be one of the foremost legal experts on the planet. We have irrefutable audio and video evidence from your own body camera that corroborates her story and directly contradicts yours. And we have the sworn testimony of your own partner. Your lie about fearing for your safety isn't just a lie. It's an insult. It's a pathetic attempt to weaponize procedure to justify your own prejudice." The union rep tried to interject again, but Chief Reynolds held up a hand, silencing him. "Dale," the chief said, his voice low and heavy, "there are two ways this goes. You can continue to lie, in which case you will be fired for cause. Your testimony will be permanently discredited with the DA's office, effectively ending your ability to be a police officer anywhere, ever. And we will recommend the U.S. Attorney's Office pursue federal charges for civil rights violations. Or you can resign, effective immediately. In exchange, the department will not pursue criminal charges, though we can't stop the justice or the federal government from doing so. You'll be disgraced, but you might stay out of prison." It wasn't a choice. It was an execution with an option for the method. Miller stared at the beige wall, the full weight of his life's collapse pressing down on him. 15 years on the force gone. His pension gone. His reputation obliterated. The sense of power and authority he had clung to for so long had evaporated, leaving him as just a man in a small, ugly room, caught in a lie he couldn't escape. He looked at his union rep, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. It was the only deal he was going to get. "I'll resign," Dale Miller whispered, the words feeling like poison on his tongue. The sound of his own defeat was the loudest thing he had ever heard. Dale Miller's forced resignation was a quiet, bloodless execution, conducted within the sterile confines of the Oak Creek police station. For a brief 48-hour period, Chief Frank Reynolds allowed himself to believe the fire was contained. The officer was gone, the justice had been placated, and the department, while bruised, could handle the internal review. He had severely underestimated the nature of the blaze. He failed to understand that he had used a garden hose to fight a wildfire, and the wind was about to change. The catalyst was not a thunderous denunciation from the Supreme Court, but a quiet, meticulously worded letter. As promised, Justice Beaumont's office sent a formal notification of the incident to the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. It was procedural, dispassionate, and laid out the facts of the unconstitutional stop with scalpel-like precision. The letter landed on the desk of a deputy attorney who knew exactly what she was looking at, a high-profile, unimpeachable account of an abuse of power. The fuse had been lit. In New York, Jessica Finch, an investigative reporter for a major national newspaper, was chasing down a lead on a financial fraud case when a new email appeared in her encrypted inbox. The source was anonymous, a trusted contact deep within the federal government. The subject line was simply, Oak Creek. The message was brief, outlining the bare facts. A traffic stop, a Supreme Court justice, and a hushed-up resignation. Finch felt a jolt of adrenaline that reporters live for. It sounded too incredible to be true. Her first call was to the Oak Creek PD public information officer, who fed her a line of rehearsed stonewalling about an internal personnel matter that has been concluded. The non-denial was all the confirmation Finch needed. She leveraged her sources, and within hours, a contact at the DOJ confirmed the existence of the letter from Justice Beaumont's office. Her editor cleared the front page. The story that dropped online that Friday afternoon was a bombshell, its headline crafted for maximum impact. Supreme Court Justice illegally detained in biased traffic stop, officer forced to resign. If the article was the spark, the leak of the body cam footage was the accelerant. Someone inside the Oak Creek municipal government, disgusted by the attempted cover-up, released the full, unedited video to a popular online news aggregator. The effect was instantaneous and overwhelming. The internet didn't just explode, it went supernova. Suddenly, every American with a smartphone could ride shotgun to a constitutional crisis. They saw Miller's swaggering approach, the glint of the sun off his badge. They heard his sneering, condescending tone as he mispronounced her name. They witnessed Justice Beaumont's incredible, unshakable composure. The hashtag #Justice for Beaumont trended worldwide, but it was soon joined by Wanshauner, Dale Miller, and Mouser Badge of Shame. The video was dissected frame by frame on cable news. Pundits and legal analysts paused on Miller's face as comprehension dawned, a perfect, high-definition portrait of arrogance turning to sheer terror. The public reaction was visceral, a tidal wave of outrage that washed away any nuance. For Dale Miller, the abstract concept of public shame became a suffocating reality. His quiet suburban street was transformed into a media encampment. Satellite trucks crushed the manicured curbs, their thick black cables snaking across his lawn. Reporters with microphones shouted his name every time a curtain twitched. His wife, Catherine, saw the video for the first time on her phone, sent to her by her sister with the caption, "Is this real?" She watched it once, then twice, the color draining from her face. The man in that video, filled with such casual cruelty and ugly prejudice, was not the man she thought she had married. When Dale came home from a trip to the store, he found her in the bedroom, silently packing suitcases for herself and their 2 children. There was no argument, no shouting. There was only a look of profound, bottomless disappointment. "I can't have our son see you as a hero anymore," she whispered, and walked out of his life. The story was no longer about a single bad cop. It had become a referendum on policing itself. The ACLU of New Jersey, emboldened by the national spotlight, announced a class action lawsuit, bringing forward 3 past victims of Miller's fishing expeditions, whose prior complaints had been dismissed. Chief Reynolds, seeing the narrative spiraling completely out of his control, called a press conference. It was a disaster. Standing at a podium, sweating under the glare of the TV lights, he looked less like a leader and more like a man managing a surrender. Was Officer Miller's behavior indicative of a larger cultural problem in your department, Chief? A reporter shouted. "We are taking this matter very seriously and will be conducting a full internal review to ensure our procedures align with best practices." Reynolds recited, his voice hollow. "Can you respond to the ACLU's claim that Miller has a documented history of biased stops that your department ignored?" Another called out. "All complaints are investigated thoroughly," he began, but his words were drowned out by the chorus of questions. He was offering bureaucratic platitudes to a public baying for blood, and they saw right through him. The final decisive blow came a week later, not from Oak Creek, but from Washington, D.C. At a formal press briefing, the Attorney General of the United States stepped to the podium. The cameras flashed, the room went silent. He spoke of the core promise of the Constitution, equal justice under law, and the sacred duty of law enforcement to uphold it. Then he delivered the verdict. "In light of the disturbing incident involving Associate Justice Rosalind Beaumont," the Attorney General stated, his voice grave, "and subsequent information that has come to our attention, the Department of Justice is hereby launching a full pattern or practice investigation into the Oak Creek Police Department." In a dingy motel room 30 miles away, Dale Miller watched the announcement on a flickering television. He heard the nation's chief law enforcement officer say his name. He saw his own disgraced face flash on the screen next to the official seal of the DOJ. It was in that moment he truly understood the karma that had befallen him. He hadn't just lost his job. He hadn't just lost his family. His single petty act of malice had become a federal case. He was no longer just a disgraced cop. He was Exhibit A in the nation's case against a broken system. The storm he had unleashed had ripped his own world apart, and now it was poised to wash away everything he had ever been a part of. Months bled into a year, and the seasons turned over Oak Creek, but the stain of that afternoon remained indelible. The Department of Justice's pattern or practice investigation was not a quiet affair conducted behind closed doors. It was a slow, methodical autopsy of a diseased police force, performed in public. Federal agents, with their sharp suits and sharper questions, became a common sight at the station, their presence a constant, humiliating reminder of the department's failure. They interviewed nearly every sworn officer, audited years of traffic stop data, arrest records, and internal complaints. The final report, when it was released, was a staggering 158-page indictment. It detailed a pervasive culture of racial bias, an unwritten policy of targeting minority drivers passing through the wealthy enclave, and a blue wall of silence that protected officers like Dale Miller. Chief Reynolds, who had spent a career cultivating an image of a tough but fair leader, was publicly disgraced. He was forced into a retirement that felt more like a banishment, leaving the department he had run for a decade under the yoke of a federal consent decree. This decree mandated years of strict oversight, the implementation of new anti-bias training programs, and the mandatory use of enhanced body camera technology. The town of Oak Creek, once a quiet symbol of suburban tranquility, was now a national case study in the long, expensive, and painful road to police reform. For Robert Peterson, the young officer who chose truth over allegiance, the path was fraught with professional peril. In the immediate aftermath, he was a pariah. The word rat was scrawled in soap on his locker mirror. Veteran officers would go silent when he entered the break room. His one-time partner, a man he had looked up to, had tried to take him down a dark road, and by refusing, he had violated their twisted code. But Peterson did not waver. He became the DOJ's star witness, providing clear-eyed, factual testimony about the culture Miller had thrived in. His integrity did not go unnoticed. When the dust began to settle, he received a call from the police chief of a large, diverse city a few counties over, a department known for its progressive, community-focused approach. "I read your testimony, Officer Peterson," the chief told him over the phone. "It takes a rare kind of courage to do what you did. We're not looking for warriors here. We're looking for guardians. I think you'd be a good fit." It wasn't just a job offer, it was a validation. He had lost the respect of men he no longer respected, and in its place he had found a new purpose. His career was not over, it was just beginning, reborn from the ashes of a choice to do the right thing when it was hardest. Dale Miller, however, found no such redemption. His life had not just ended, it had been dismantled, piece by painful piece. His resignation was only the beginning of his freefall. The civil rights lawsuits, both from the ACLU and from Justice Beaumont herself, drained his finances and kept his name in the papers as a villain. His wife, Catherine, had tried to stand by him, at first believing his lies about a misunderstanding. But when the body cam footage played on every news channel, she saw the raw, undisguised contempt in his face, heard the venom in his voice, and recognized a man she did not know and could not defend. The final argument was brutal. "It wasn't just this one time, was it, Dale?" she had asked, her voice hollow. "This is who you are." He had no answer. She packed her bags and took the children that night, the shame too heavy a burden for their family to bear. The divorce papers that followed were a quiet finality. He tried to find other work in law enforcement, then in private security, but his name was toxic. In one interview, the hiring manager looked at his resume, then up at him, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "Dale Miller," he said slowly. "Weren't you the guy from that Oak Creek incident?" The interview was over before it began. His karma was a slow, grinding erosion of self. He sold his house to pay the legal fees. He moved into a dingy, one-bedroom apartment overlooking a strip mall. He finally found a job, a humiliating parody of his former life, a third-shift security guard at a desolate warehouse complex. There he spent his nights walking endless, echoing concrete floors, his only authority being a key that opened empty loading bays. He was no longer a predator. He was a ghost, haunted by the memory of the power he'd abused. Sometimes a car of teenagers would park at the edge of the lot, and he would feel the phantom itch to flash his lights, to demand, to control. But he had no lights, no authority, nothing. He was just a man in a cheap uniform, watching the world go on without him. Justice Rosalind Beaumont never spoke publicly about the incident again. Her silence was more powerful than any statement. One crisp autumn afternoon, almost a year later, she sat with her old friend, Catherine Gable, in a sun-drenched study filled with the scent of tea and old books. "I still get angry when I think about it, Rosalind," Catherine said, setting her teacup down with a clatter. "That man, his arrogance, the way he spoke to you, he deserved everything he got and more." Rosalind looked out the window, her gaze distant, watching the autumn leaves perform their final graceful descent. Anger is a secondary emotion, my friend. It's a response to fear or to injustice. What I felt that day was a profound disappointment and a sense of duty. A duty to ruin that man's life? No, Rosalind said, turning back, her eyes clear and focused. A duty to the law. He was an infection, and if an infection is not treated, it spreads. My role was simply to expose it to the light. The system, for all its flaws, did the rest. What matters is not what happened to Dale Miller, the man. What matters is that the system that produced and protected him is now being forced to change. That is the only victory worth discussing. She paused, a small, thoughtful smile touching her lips. I received a letter last week from a young woman at Howard University. She's in her first year of law school. She said my handling of the incident solidified her desire to become a civil rights attorney. She said I showed her that the most powerful weapon against a bully with a badge is a deep and abiding knowledge of the law. In that quiet statement lay the ultimate truth. The hard karma that befell Dale Miller wasn't a bolt of lightning from the heavens. It was the intricate, inescapable machinery of justice, which he had mistaken for a frail old woman in a well-kept car. He had built his world on the fragile foundation of his own bigotry, and she, by simply existing in her own quiet dignity, had revealed its rotten core and watched it collapse under its own weight. That single traffic stop reveals a powerful truth. True authority isn't found in a badge or a uniform, but in integrity, dignity, and an unwavering belief in the rule of law. Justice Rosalind Beaumont didn't need to raise her voice. Her entire life was a testament to the principles Officer Miller tried to trample. He sought to assert power over a person, but she represented a principle, and principles are unbreakable. This story is a stark reminder that prejudice and arrogance build houses of cards, ready to be blown down by the slightest breath of accountability. Karma, in the end, wasn't a mystical force. It was the simple, logical consequence of one man's hatred colliding with one woman's greatness. If this story of justice and consequence resonated with you, please hit that like button to help us share it with more people. Let us know in the comments what part of this story stood out to you the most. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next real-life story of when the powerless find their voice and the powerful face their reckoning. Thank you for listening.